Hello, Nick here from Stratcolab, where good organizations go to get better. And today we have another in our series of the Stratcolab 5 to 10, where you give us 5 to 10 minutes of your time and we give you an equal number of ideas to make things better for you and your organization. Today's topic, management questions we forget to ask. Let's get right to it. Number one, how does what is happening differ from what should be happening? Now, those of you familiar with Kepner-Trigo analysis or thoughts proposed by the rational manager may recognize this as the fundamental definition of what constitutes a problem. In other words, a problem exists when there is a delta or a difference between the desired state, which is to say what should be happening, and the actual state, which is what is happening. Represented in the diagram here on the side, what we have is the desired state in green, which is going along at a certain level. And then you see that the red, the actual state, what is happening, actually is tracking pretty well with what should be happening until we get a big divergence. When that divergence is happening, that's what? That's a problem. That's a deviation between what should be happening and what is happening. Fundamental difference of a problem. Now, why is this important? In today's day and age, people get very passionate about just about everything, especially causes close to their hearts. So oftentimes, this passion can easily prevail over reason. So if you find you're in a situation where what is happening pretty much matches up with what should be happening, perhaps you're not really having a problem at all, but rather an emotional discussion instead. The other thing about asking this question, about how does what is happening differ from what should be happening, is it forces you to pay a lot of attention ahead of time to defining what should be happening and understanding that first. Only then can you perform a valid and useful diagnosis into looking at the difference between the two. Let's go on to the second. At what cost? Now that sounds like an awfully mercenary question to ask, a cold-hearted one. Why should we be thinking in terms of dollars when we should be leading instead by our hearts, by what's nearest and dearest to us? The reason came to me in a discussion by a man who had done a lot of economic analysis on behalf of the United Nations in trying to understand how best to allocate funds for global relief projects. And essentially what he said was, it's hard to question people who have desirable things that are close to the heart that they claim will do some good. If somebody comes to you and says, in exchange for $1, I will give you $1.50's worth of benefit of good. Now, does that sound like a good deal? Well, on the face of it, yes. That's great. But what if you can get a better return than that? What if you can get, for that $1, you can get $10 of good? What if you can get $100 of good? What if you can get 1,000? Well, then at that cost, with those kinds of numbers, maybe $1.50's worth of good is not good enough because there's a cost involved in that. The same analyst who looked at these problems has been doing this globally for a number of different countries, said what caused him to put so much emphasis into these kinds of discussions and into the question of at what cost is because we simply can't do everything first. Everybody has resource limitations. It doesn't matter whether you're running a store, a personal business, a global relief program, a charity, or anything else. You have to get maximum return for the funds and the resources at your disposal. So when you're being given something that sounds good, ask yourself at what cost? What are you neglecting in order to get that value? And is that value enough for the people you represent? Next question. What is the selection bias behind the data? This question is reveals an Achilles heel behind a lot of quantified data analysis. especially it's most treacherous when you happen to agree with a position that you're trying to support. Oftentimes we find that data are very convincing, especially if we really believe in that cause, and that the convincing data are quietly, subtly magnified and amplified by our own good selves because we believe in them, to the detriment of the truth and an objective analysis. In fact, if you believe in the cause, you should look extra hard to look at disconfirming data. Look at the data that don't agree with the analysis and ask yourself, is there something here I should be listening to? Because there's some selection bias, and your confirmation bias may be showing if you allow yourself to be pulled away and lured or directed by that bias instead of being more objective. Here's another question. I like this one. Why stop there? This is a short or abbreviated form of the reductio ad absurdum argument, also known as a Euclidean proof, which is, in essence, ties to the yin and yang symbol you see on the chart over here, which is reasoning by taking the contrasting position. Many times we find an argument that sounds somehow off, and we're not sure how to engage with it to see how valid it really is. In those situations, one of the most useful techniques to apply is to accept it on its face and say, okay, let's say I support that. Well, let me take and extend that argument and see how it goes if I believe it's true. A mathematician did this by taking on the argument of whether somebody was unbeatable at the game of checkers. And he said, rather than to say that you aren't, I'm going to assume that you are. And to prove it, here's a checkerboard, make the first move. The ace checker player made the first move. Then the mathematician said, okay, wait a minute. He turned the table around, make a first move now for the other side. You are going to play against yourself. The revelation there, why stop there, in this argument was, wait a minute. You can't have both sides winning. At best, the two sides will play to a draw, but sooner or later somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. No matter what happens, you can't have that one individual winning both sides of the game. Why stop there? Good argument. Finally, here's the last one. This is my favorite. What else? Now, we live in a world where odd things happen, including things that we don't expect. And so, for example, we're going to be told one thing, and then, like, a place is always open, we get there, and what happens? It's closed. Well, many times critical thoughts or data are neglected, unsaid, or downright suppressed if we only stick to the script, if we only ask the questions that are expected, the scripted questions. I learned this from a colonel in his capacity as an inspector general when he was conducting inspection reports. What he always did is, by all means, anytime there's a complicated issue and certainly important failure analysis to be done, he'd ask the scripted questions, the standard ones, the ones everybody was prepared for, listen carefully to the answers. He even took notes. But then at the end, once he got all that out of the way, he'd close his book and he'd say, what else? It was only by asking what else that he would find all the things that nobody thought to mention. And quite often, this asking of that two-word question gives people the license, the freedom, and the opportunity to say what nobody else is expecting, and that's where the real epiphanies come. So there you have it, a quick recap about questions we forget to ask. Check to see how what is differs from what should be, at what cost, as opposed to whether something is just desirable, what the selection bias is behind the data, why stop there, and what else. Don't forget to ask these questions, and you will find that you're getting a deeper understanding of the issue in front of you that will inform your decisions and improve your resilience. We hope this has been useful to you. If it has, well, you know what to do. Give us some feedback and make it positive. Give us a thumbs up. Feel free to come back to us and let us know what your thoughts are. And if it's been useful for you, you've made our day, feel free to share. And when all is said and done, hurry back.